Yes, we're listening.
The royal we.
Will be says when you forget about November, in December, or January. You emailed that yet? No, I'm just getting it compacted. That's why my computer's not here.
All right, welcome everybody to this risk and assurance meeting. I know you've all had a busy morning, and so in today's papers we've got quite a bit to get through as well this afternoon. Looking forward to it. I'll just open up with a karakia. Tu tau mai I ranga, tu tau mai I raro, tu tau mai I waho, tu tau mai I roto. Ki tau e te moritu, te mori ora ki te katoa. Omie, huie, takie. Right. So on our list of apologies today, we do have two. We have Jeremy and Phil, who can't be with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And second.
Yep.
Randall, thank you very much. Declarations of interest. Just the usual reminder that if anybody sees anything today that they wish to stand aside from, then please do so. Great. Public forum, petitions and deputations. We have had no one request to speak. Confirmation of our last minutes. We've had a yes, Lyndall.
Yeah, just a correction. I should have been an apology. I think. I'm sure that it's. Oh yes, there is one. Sorry, that's right. Happy to move those.
Yes, I do see. Yep. So, apologies. Yes, we had a couple away last time. Anything else from anybody on those? No, Lyndall to move and Boris to second. Thank you. Notification of extraordinary meeting. We had none. Questions? No questions from anybody has to myself, so nothing's been received in those respects. And the Chair and Councillor report. Yes, so for myself, I always sort of reflect when I read the pack and in terms of what would be some useful words to share with the committee. And certainly reading today's pack and then I guess reflecting on our terms of reference as a whole, in terms of what the committee sort of delegated to do. And probably reminded by a conversation I had with somebody else a few weeks ago that out of all the different committees that the council has, this one here probably has the most eyes inwardsly focused and looking in terms of at the internal areas of the council, in terms of internal policy, internal process, internal procedure and the likes. I think a number of the other committees are very, what are we doing externally in terms of our outputs and our impacts on the community. Here, health and safety of the staff, our compliance with the legislation, but as a whole, we've now got internal audit up and running in terms of how internally are we running things. So just sort of I think a different lens, I think, when we get around this committee in terms of, and certainly a fantastic opportunity to make sure that we're contributing as governors to how the organisation is running internally. So that was certainly my reflection on, I guess, the role of the committee, and especially looking at today's papers. We're talking about things like how our staff are working in and around water. A number of those sort of health and safety aspects as well today, which are getting discussed and raised. Anyone else got any other matters they'd like to either comment on that or anything else to report?
Not really, but a few things that have come up through the meeting though. But,
Clicked on something across the screen.
Oh,
It's Tanya put something there.
Okay, we will move on to our first report. Agenda item 9.1, page 15. Welcome, Tanya. Great to see you again.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou.
putting together this paper?
Hang on. Sorry.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to present my report, take it as read and welcome any questions that people may have.
I would ask, would you be able to just give a brief sort of overview and just touch on maybe just some of the key areas, just at a very high level, just 30 seconds.
Okay. Right, so as we mentioned, the framework document and policy have been approved by the executive and this committee. We're in the process of finalising that and getting it available internally. There are a number of deep dives that we've got in today's meeting. As per our schedule, although I think there is one that we've actually delayed, which was Paul Holz's one.
There's a couple, as council may know, we've had a few changes around the GMs and their responsibilities. So, and fairness to give the GMs opportunity to come up to speed with their new areas, we elected not to put them in the hot seat by giving them a deep dive to do straight away. But those deep dives are still there and they will be coming back to the committee in the future day.
Yeah, they haven't been forgotten. They're definitely on the schedule. It's just, breathing space for the GMs, as Amy mentioned. The risk management program, the focus for the moment is actually on developing tools for use by staff so we can roll that out across the organisation. We haven't lost sight of some of the additional work that still needs to take place with the executive, and I'm working hard to try and run them in alignment. Business continuity. I think we mentioned at last meeting that we'd had the training, we'd run an exercise. We have the report from Kestrel Group. Management have reviewed that and there's been some recommendations and we're working on an action plan for that, which I believe is attached.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Yes, certainly a number of sort of important areas in here. Touched on all of them. So just to remind everyone that risk management framework, which we agreed in the last meeting, that sort of sets the tone for the different, I guess, for the language that we use in terms of how we talk about risk in the organisation. And then really it's about operationalising that within areas, which is what Tanya has commented on. And certainly in my eyes, that's the next big cab off the rank in terms of making sure that internally teams are understanding risk within their own divisions, and how they're managing it. So I'll open up to questions from the floor. Alistair.
Oh, okay. I was only thinking, sorry. Risk is in everything, isn't it? Do you feel that we are getting too conscious, through you, the chair, I've got to get things right these days. Do you feel that we are becoming too risk adverse?
I don't think so. I think what we're in the process of doing is actually raising the profile of risk. Again, the focus has been at the executive level. People are hearing about it across the organisation. I think what we need to do, and that's why I'm working very hard on tools, is actually present how we should be looking at risk across the organisation and actually set some parameters around it so that as an organisation we are taking informed, calculated maybe risks, but we're at least aware of it, and teaching people to assess the risk, because not all risk is bad, not all risk is good, but there's opportunities and threats out of most risks. We need to work out how we're going to handle the ones that are threats to us and take advantage of the ones that are opportunities for us.
Thank
you. Just building on Tani's point, when we started this risk journey, it was about 2019, I think. We assessed our risk management maturity as being reasonably low, and I think the old adage that you can't manage what you don't measure is true. So, knowing that we've got a low base, there's a danger that you don't know what you don't know, and that can come and trip you up later on. So I do think that, echoing what Tanya said, it's really important for us to know and understand our risks. So we can manage them, but B, risks in and of themselves also create opportunities. So what are the ones that we can lean into as well, to enable us to continue operating, because that's what it's all about at the end of the day.
John?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, probably to follow on from Amy's comments, I guess, there are always risks that we're unaware of. COVID was a classic. And I guess my question is, where is our touch points externally to get across these risks as they come? How do we look outside of our organisation to connect with the right organisations that will can maybe help steer us or maybe open our eyes up to stuff that we're not quite seeing?
Yeah, look, we've recently, we have Bethia Gibson on board, who has a background in risk. Bethia has met with Paul and I and actually given us some good guidance on some of the things we can be looking at. From my perspective, some of that information will come from our people, because our people are out there in the field doing the work. Our executive are across a certain level. My role then actually becomes to start looking across the sector, and we've got some really good resources through Local Government New Zealand, Taituara, some of those agencies, Risk New Zealand, that we're members of, where we can start looking at that. There's global documentation that's being done locally. PwC have done risk surveys and providing information. Really what I'm suggesting here is that I'm going to up my game and actually start looking at some of these areas outside of ES, possibly outside of our industry, but just see what else is happening out there and start bringing it to the table.
Very pertinent questions from both of you in terms of how we as an organisation are thinking about risks, and really, when you're sort of diving into a certain area, that's when it becomes a real tangible thing in terms of actually sort of is it legislative compliance? Are we talking about our compliance with RMA in terms of our role? Is that the risk of getting that wrong, or is it health and safety and our people being out there working on the field and risk of getting that wrong? One of the points which I know is touched on here, and I might just get Tanya or Amy to talk on it, is what is our appetite, Alistair and John, for risk, which I think is what you're asking. So different people have different appetite for risk, and then we have a governance group who have to come together and make a decision.
Yes.
So the question you're asking has been asked by all organisations, and they call it having this risk appetite discussion. And we have talked about that. I'm just going to get one of these two to remind me what our next steps.
Yep, risk appetite is certainly on my agenda. It is something that I've been giving some thought to, and in the discussions we've had with Bethia, where we're looking at doing a review of the existing top strategic risks, I have some thoughts around where we should start discussing where our risk appetite sits and have that kōrero with the executive and see where they land, and then we can present that back to this committee. But it is one of those pieces of work that I want to continue to run in parallel with operationalising our risks.
Yep.
It is quite crucial. It actually sets the scene for how much risk we take, are we risk averse, and answers a lot of these questions.
And we would have a discussion as a governance group as
Yes.
well?
Yes.
Would that be?
Yes, they'll come as a recommendation. I would like the exec to get their head around it and actually agree and accept where we've landed, and it will then be presented for discussion to this committee. I believe that's how it should work, Amy.
Lyndall?
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I guess my question is, some time ago, the councillors sat around and discussed their risk appetite, but that was the previous council. So my question is really, when do you see the opportunity for this current councillors to sit around and revisit their appetite that was expressed some time ago?
Yeah, I think that might have been before my time, but that said, We've done a lot of work on identifying our current strategic risks. The executive have placed or done a lot of work around that. What I would like to do is actually extract that information from our executive team, given that we have a restructure and we have some new people in those roles, actually get the input from those guys before we come back to the council.
And Amy?
Yeah, so just to build on, so what I think Tony was saying was that because last time round, I think it was council had the conversation, not the exec, so
Yeah,
exec will have the
that's right.
conversation. But bring that conversation that we had here for you to have that conversation as well. And to build on John's point, I think last time round or the time before we brought the horizon scanning conversation, we brought it as a paper, but we did say that we would workshop that with full council. So that's still a conversation that's got to be had as well.
Boris?
Well, thank you. There was an interesting article in I don't know if everybody gets the Southern Times, but Joe Bennett, who writes in the Southern Times quite regularly, and you might know, wrote about risk this morning in the Southern Times, quite coincidentally, actually, if anybody else has read that. And there are two, he talked about putting signs up at the top of the cliff saying, warning, steep grade, do not jump off here, that type of thing. And you're thinking, sometimes warnings can be a bit over the top, but those sorts of warnings are what the Department of Conservation puts on their bridges in the national parks. Say, no more than 10 people on this bridge, because then if it does collapse, that at least they've said, if you do this, then these are the consequences. So that is protecting them as an organisation from other people's stupidity, I suppose. So there's that kind of risk that we need to be aware of. And the other kind of risk is for people making sure that we do things so that our staff are not put at risk, like the stuff about the access to water today. So the question is, and it's sort of like Alice's one, really, how much is too much in terms of warning about risks, and where is the right level so that people can protect people from stupidity, but we need to have it set at the right level. And I assume that you're comfortable that we are aware of those extremes and that we are at the right place.
And a lot of those extremes are the ones that get reasonably quickly escalated through to this committee and council. My belief is that we need to create an awareness, such as you mentioned, the signs at the bridge. We need to have awareness before we actually get to the bridge. What are we looking for and what are the potential risks to us and our people? So creating that awareness is part of operationalising risk and having everybody talking the same language, understanding how we assess them, understanding what a risk is and what a risk isn't. So that's the work that I'm focusing on at the moment.
The other question I had was about the risk to damage to this building and the things that are in it. Say there was a fire at night time and then nobody was here and we lost a lot of our records. How are those records protected so that we don't lose them?
Yeah.
I was going to say, so some of them are kept in a strong room, and I can't speak to the fire retardancy of that, but I can find out. We've got backup information on server, so a lot of our information since 2012 has been held in our document repository system, so it's...
It'll be in the cloud somewhere, or...
Yeah. And then we've got an archive storage space, which we lease from SDC as well. So different things for different reasons, but reasonably well protected, I would have said.
Just following on from that, when we went through our business continuity training, I actually went into the strong room, and the strong room is concrete roof, so it's completely concrete contained, so it is reasonably fire retardant. I didn't look at the finance one, but most of our records are in the main one, and then we have the digitisation projects as well. But business continuity starts crossing into that example that you talked about, and we have plans in place. We have exercised and trained on those plans and will continue to do so.
Okay.
points.
So it certainly does dovetail very nicely into this business continuity piece, which is in this paper. And there's a nice table at the back listing all the actions that we have got to do. We touched on this paper or the next one, but one of the things that I guess stood out for me the most was the dates that we've got beside it, and looked like some quite sharp timelines to get things done, especially when I was looking at some of those actions, such as to review all the business impact assessments and identify the critical processes within departments, which I know is not a small task. How comfortable are you feeling with that? Because to me, it does look like a lot to do.
I think the biggest challenge is actually motivating the other parties involved. I think between Paul, Amy and I, we can make a lot of our actions happen, but interacting with the rest of the organisation, we do have to give them some leeway. But it is work under action.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, Tanya. I have someone to move. Asked to move and seconded. Michael, favour? Against? Passed. Thank you very much. Appreciate
I'll
it.
sit here and talk to the next paper.
9.2. That is the internal audit report. Fantastic. Okay. So, if you'd like to give us a brief overview again. And then we can...
Yes, as we've talked about, PwC, we're appointed our internal auditors. We've completed the procurement contract management. The PwC staff were on site in June doing the asset management report or asset management internal audit. That paper has come through and it's currently being reviewed by management and discussed with PwC. The final audit for the year has been proposed as being accounts payable receivable. There's been some discussion, given that we have had the change of GMs, that it may not be the most appropriate for the next audit. So that is currently being discussed with PwC as well. But really pleased that we've actually achieved 2 full, reasonably sizable audits this year, and hopefully one further one before the end of the year.
Thank you. No, it's good to see. So the internal audit program, which we got underway recently, and PwC is our external provider, and so they will do certain reviews internally on certain areas that we ask them to focus on. Amy?
So just to talk to a little bit about the 2 reports. So when the procurement audit came back, first and foremost, we did have an action plan in place, but given that we've had a change in GM, we're just reviewing that action plan to assess its suitability and see if there's any other actions or different actions that we can take, but that will be reviewed and come back to this committee to go forward. We, in terms of the asset management audit, we spoke to the auditors late last week and they'll be getting feedback on that. So we gave them verbal feedback and we just had a discussion about some of the findings that they raised, and we'll be feeding back our feedback to them on the report this week, and hoping to get that tied up and brought to them. Definitely be here for the December meeting.
Great. I think it's some of this internal audit work does link into the previous conversation around risk, and I think it's a good example of when we're sort of asking about are we going too far with risk, and say, well, actually we've got these internal auditors going in and doing some inspections. Is that too much? If we remember from their last audit report, there was a number of findings around procurement, which I think are very valuable to how the organisation works as a whole, in terms of how the organisation is contracting external parties and then managing the financials alongside that. And there are a number of areas that we can improve in where there are gaps. And by that, and it is on page 24, it talks about the fact that we need a register of all of our contracts, which is centralised. And you can imagine how many contracts the organisation might have, and that if it is people have just got them in their own desks and on their own, laptops, can sort of imagine people, staff come and go, and then those contracts just disappear. So that's sort of an example of risk coming to life that we're now, through our internal audit program, getting fixed up.
And through you, Chair, and it was a very wonderful example you've given, because actually that is a piece of work that is underway. We do have a contract management software, and some of our key teams, for example, those who use contractors a lot, our catchment operations team have been loading their contractors and the contractors into there. That's really important for us more broadly in the organisation, because of the health and safety obligations that our contractors have as well. So it's one way that we can join up those two pieces of work in the organisation as well.
Yes, just to follow that on from this morning's conversation in Jane's report around technology improvements, and so I'm assuming that the likes of the procurement information hub will dovetail with the IT work that Jane and the team are doing, so that it's all part of this. Or is it going to be a standalone thing that's...
Are you talking about integration into IRIS?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's an off-the-shelf piece of software, so I don't know whether it was scoped to integrate into IRIS.
And should
next gen.
it? There's the other question.
Actually,
You know, I
yeah.
don't know, but that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I was going to say potentially the new IRIS Next Gen is built on a platform called Datascape, which has modules including finance, which we don't have yet. But you know, as we look to evolve our IT infrastructure and our systems, you know, there's some sense in having more connectivity and joined upness, as it were. And a lot of the applications that you can purchase these days have you know, have the ability to be integrated. So yeah.
I guess the broader question is, A, is it possible, and B, should it? You know, is it more risky to have it integrated with some other work, or is it more risky to have it in isolation and not talking to?
I think the point would be it depends what you're holding in IRIS that you would want that connectivity for fundamentally at the end of the day.
That's it. Would you like to make a comment on that one?
Yeah, I thought I'd just invite myself to the table.
Fantastic.
Thank you. The reason I want to, so the actions for procurement and contract management now sits under my area. And the reason I would like to review this is to make sure we're focusing on the most impactful actions. I'm here to put the contract register system in, but I haven't looked at it yet. But integration is something that's quite important to me. Sorry, excuse me. And I think particularly with this piece of work, it's important to think about how procurement flows into contracts and contract management, and how we kind of get everything flowing quite seamlessly through from when we make that decision to we need to go to the market to procure something, or whatever way we do that, to making sure we pay the right bills in the right way at the right time. At this stage, I'm not sure that IRIS would be the system, but it's possibly more the finance system. And I think in this whole space, there might be some other tools and systems that we need to buy. It's not all behavioural change. There is certainly a lot of behavioural change. So that's just why I've asked to kind of pause the program, because I felt it was quite ambitious in terms of all the timelines that we had in place, but just make sure it's a really integrated and solid program, but focusing on the most impactful action. So that they are the same questions that have been in mind.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nicole.
Yes, well, I'm very pleased to see this bit of work, because at least it can take away the perception of unfairness or whatever, that you've got a procurement policy that is transparent, and sometimes we get complaints about all the big guys got all the contracts sort of thing. So I think it's a path to actually people can go and have looks at it and say, well, actually, you do have a transparent and fair and consistent process, which we probably haven't always had. So this is a good risk management tool in that area.
Thank you. All right, any other questions? No. Someone like to move the paper?
Happy to move.
Thank you, Nicole, and seconded by John. In favour?
Aye.
Yes, passed. Thank you. Thank you very much, Tanya. 9.3 on page 25. Legislation compliance review.
So that's me, that's just a paper to update the committee on where we're at with this. So when we started our internal audit program of work, we ended up having two pieces of work go and train at the same time. One was the internal audit program that Tania has spoken to, and then there was a legislation compliance review. The committee will know from my comments on the annual activity plan that that was a piece of work I'd hoped to bring to you earlier in the year, but given the change of government, the change of focus on legislation, we elected to take the opportunity to pause and review the areas that we might want to reflect on through that compliance review, because as you'll see from the paper, there are a large number of pieces of legislation that apply to council, and the effort to outcome ratio of going through all of them at the same time would be disproportionate. So we have elected to focus on, and they're itemised on page 28 at the bottom, 8 areas of focus. Trusting that you have read them there, and that review is currently underway. There are a number of people from Wynne Williams, lawyers from Wynne Williams, who are engaging with different people with responsibilities for these areas across the business at the current time, and we hope to have that report reported back and presented to this committee next meeting.
Fantastic.
Sounds good.
It's a big list.
It's a big list.
So I'll start. So on page 28, like you highlighted, it does list the 8 bullet points of the areas that are under review. So just keen to hear a bit more in terms of why those areas were selected out of the long list that we do have.
Yeah, sure. So I guess there were 2 key areas of conversation or focus. One, given the work that our legal firm do, they're aware of areas where councils can not always be performing at their best, or where there might be holes, that are just doing that check for us as you'd like them to do in an audit. And there were also areas of focus for us to make sure that are we undertaking our duties in a legislative manner. So yeah.
All the councillors can see there's some interesting topics there: maritime transport, biosecurity, warrants.
Yeah.
So,
and some of that stuff's like really important to make sure that, particularly when we're dealing in an environment now that can be slightly more litigious and challenging, it's really important for us to be able to provide the assurance to process to yourselves, to the public, that we have undertaken our duties as we are legislated to do and in a correct manner, which means that whatever actions that then follow, are not able to be challenged. Yeah.
Well, I comment, Mr. Chairman, it's a very big job. We're just looking at the RMA, for example. It's a massive piece of legislation, and making sure that we comply with every bit of it is quite challenging.
And actually it's quite topical, because that is one of the pieces of legislation that's being changed by the government.
Yeah.
So hence focusing on specific pieces of the legislation rather than a carte blanche for the full thing.
No, it's all done to work.
and so that piece there is little.
Just the paragraph above that says that the topics will be agreed with the council each year to allow the council to reassess any topics of interest. So when do you imagine that happening for the next couple of years? Like when
It's
do
sort
we
of,
schedule?
when will we schedule them?
Yeah.
Well, I guess we wait to get through this one.
Absolutely.
And we see what the work program looks like of the back of that. One of the things, and just reflecting on conversation this morning about having resources to do the work, one of the things about identifying the areas of work that you need to focus on is that you then need to focus on them, which takes time, effort and energy. So just making sure that we resource to deliver the pieces of work and the programs of work that we're signing up to as part of that is is important. Otherwise, you end up with just, you know, an impossibly long and never-ending to-do list. So there's got to be an element of pragmatism.
Yeah, sure.
And that, so I would imagine that would be early to mid next year, though, that we would be having a conversation to think about, okay, what's the next focus of the program.
And those bullet points might throw up some other areas of.
Yeah, potentially. Yep.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, hopefully there'll be some more information coming through from government about changes. You know, there's certainly a bit in the REM space that's, you know,
yeah,
that's likely to be going through in the next 6 to 12 months.
Great. Any other questions? No. Someone to move? John, thank you. Second?
Yep.
And all in favour? Against? Passed. Thank you. Looking forward to seeing the output of that.
Yes.
It's good to see it underway.
Yeah, no,
Thank you.
agreed.
9.4, health and safety. Paul, welcome to the table. Thank you for your report. There's, I know we've got you for a couple of papers. Yeah, there's quite a bit in this one today. So, here I ask for an overview, but there is quite a bit, so I don't know. I don't know if there is such a thing with this
I'll
paper.
just draw your attention to a couple of things.
Yes, yes.
Thank you very much. I'll take the report as being read and happy to take questions. But there are a few things I'd just like to draw your attention to. One is, and I'm pretty sure most of you would have noticed it in the statistics and in the numbers, the number of aggressive interactions our staff have been having with customers once again. Might be sounding a bit like a broken record here, but we are seeing you know, a lot of these interactions that are leading to some aggressive behaviour. Now, for this last quarter, the majority of those incidents were related to a specific piece of work that we were undertaking, which is around winter grazing, which is normally a heightened time of tension amongst our community in general. But you know, from a positive perspective, what we really are, myself and the health and safety team are really trying to do is encourage our staff to report these incidents, because I think, you know, in the past, I don't think we've really necessarily reported them. You know, things have been reported via emails and discussions at team meetings and things like that, but not actually being recorded as an incident. So we really sort of kind of upped our game in trying to get these numbers up. So hence, you know, that could explain a bit more of the sudden spike, and we'll most probably see that continuing over the next few quarters and such. So yeah, that is something that we are dealing with, and it's definitely something that's on the radar constantly for us as an organisation. As far as our aggressive customer task force goes, that's now we're trying to wrap that task force up with a final action plan. Now, that action plan is addressing organisational recommendations, so that's looking at the organisation as a whole. Saying that these individual incidents that are happening, each one gets investigated, each one has a suite of actions that sits behind each one of those incidents, addressing most probably more operational type actions, whereas the aggressive task force is looking at organisational wide actions. So we sort of trying to wrap that up and get the final stages of that in front of the executive as a action plan as such. And you know, once we've got it through that step, we will then bring that to share with the committee itself. Just the other piece I'd like to draw your attention to, so we always talk about speeding and driving. At my last report, I reported that messaging has been going to our managers. We've seen a bit of a decrease particularly in our medium and high incidents, but I don't think we're necessarily seeing, because I'm seeing up-to-date information, I'm not necessarily seeing a decrease in the sort of the low ones, which is just the +10, between the 10 and 15 kilometre range. So we're still seeing that being relatively high, and you know, I'm planning to get back to our managers to find out how they're finding those reports and whether those reports are adding any value to the discussions they're having with their teams. You've already touched on contractor management. That's one of our key audit findings from our auditor. So there's a lot of work happening in that space, and I think we've touched on a few things. One being a contract register. So this is this digital platform that we're using to capture our contractors. And what we've done is we've loaded in a couple of the division's contractors into this, and this allows us to go to a single source to find whether the contractor has actually been approved and does have a contract in place. So in the software, you're able to then find their insurance certificates, their contracts, and whether they've actually been pre-qualified from a health and safety perspective. So as far as I could possibly add a bit more to the integration side of things, I think the plan is to integrate it into as many bits and pieces as we can. Currently, it's a standalone off-the-shelf package, but we do have some influence as to how it's being developed. So, and then running in parallel with that is some health and safety documentation and processes that we're looking to fine-tune to help our procurement process run more smoothly and to address some of the health and safety concerns we have around contractors. Thank you. Questions?
John, if you'd like to start.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the question, obviously we're seeing the reporting of the aggressive behaviour towards our staff on site. And look, you know, that's for the GMs or the leaders of those organisations to work through how they present. The staff choose to present themselves, but I wonder, is there an overall angst or view of our council or whatever? And I guess what I'm asking is there something at a governance level of just trying to build that trust within the community or that relationship that could help? Because, you know, you guys can only do so much, and we are the conduit to the community. And is there something as governance, could we assist in some space? Because it is a concern reading these reports, and I would like to think the majority I know would not behave like that, but we all know it is stressful in some situations, and whether there's some sort of assistance that could be done.
Very, very good question, and I think, you know, you are most certainly in a privileged position where you hold the mana to be able to represent this organisation. So yeah, it's I think when you're going out and meeting your community and speaking to individuals, I think the messaging should be very clear that, you know, we will not tolerate you know, the behaviour towards you know, staff, and you know, that's not what we represent, and that is not something that us as councillors and as community members would actually you know, endorse in any way whatsoever. And the same goes for yourselves. You know, you most certainly are not immune to this, and you yourself need, you know, you need to be putting those precautions in for yourself too, because you are also going to be exposed to it, and I'm sure some of you have already been exposed to it. But I would say if we keep a, you know, consistent messaging, and I think, you know, the messaging coming from the executive is that we will not tolerate this, and you know, Wilma has made it very clear as the chief executive that, you know, we will not tolerate this. And you know, I think the more we message that, the more we get that out into the public, I think there's going to be, you know, people will start realizing that, you know, it's not going to get you anywhere.
Yeah.
It's not.
Amy, would you like to?
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, we just had conversations in the sector recently. It seems that, you know, it's not unique to what's going on here. It's an issue across the motu, and certainly to pick up on Paul's point, as elected members, you know, you're not immune from the impact of this either. So it's a concerted effort amongst all of us. I don't know if anybody saw, there was an LGNZ presentation a while back looking at this. It was a discussion with elected members on, you know, on what they can do to keep themselves, you know, safe. There's some, you know, not very nice stories out there about people who, you know, suffered the adverse impacts of aggression from their constituency, you know, against them. So it's, you know, do the training, do your health and safety plans, assess your risk. You know, let's make it really clear that it's not going to be tolerated. You know, also let's try and understand our community, you know, and, you know, accepting that, you know, there is a lot of pressure on people out there, but it doesn't excuse not behaving in a professional manner.
Alistair?
Paul and Amy, sorry, through you, Chair,
Yes.
Paul and Amy. The feedback we get, and it comes on their telephones, I'm not going to say constantly, but it is there, that there are certain people within the system cause the aggravation more so than all people. So is that sort of captured, and do you give them more training or do something? Or what I'm saying is completely wrong?
Look at, we are all dealing with individuals, and different individuals have different resilience in, to deal with these certain customers. And look, I will not deny the fact that some of our staff might be quite assertive when it comes to this kind of behaviour, and they might come across as being assertive. But I think on general, I don't see that being a problem that sits within, our staff or with our staff. I don't hear of cases of people complaining that our staff have been particularly rude to them or something. And I'm pretty sure if that came through, that'll be dealt with, pretty swiftly by the, by the people leaders as such. But let's not cloud the water by saying, if someone's being assertive towards a customer because they're being particularly aggressive towards them, that's seen as bad customer service. That's just being potentially, saying, right, I won't tolerate this. And yes, we have had scenarios where we've asked staff not to take the call, or to, if someone does start kicking off, to actually, politely put the phone down and say, we won't be having this conversation until you've either, calmed down or prepared to speak to me, in a more appropriate manner. But, yes, I think there's always opportunity to improve our customer service. So, most certainly if there is any issues around that, I'm confident that our people leaders address it straight away.
Can I go?
Yep, if you'd like to follow up, yes.
If that was identified to our organisation, that there was 1, 2, 3 or 4 people causing more of the dust than others, how would we handle it?
I think it's through their people leaders. Amy,
Yeah, look, it's really important when you get any feedback like that to get the specifics of the situation, and in the spirit of giving feedback to anybody about anything. It's just really good practice. So the first thing that we'd be expecting to happen is that someone would be asking those questions and investigate that, and then take that opportunity to discuss that with the staff member concerned. And, there's always, one person's view and the other person's view, and the truth always sits somewhere in the middle. So it's, it's about giving everybody the opportunity to ensure that they've been heard and getting the information together to have the conversation. And then what happens from there depends on what you find at the end of the day in terms of, but, we'd always want to be making sure that our people are engaging appropriately with members of the public. But to Paul's point, sometimes it's not how you say, but what you're saying that people don't like, and we can't always control for that either.
Thank you.
Morris?
Notwithstanding all of that, do we have specific training courses for people who are likely to get into an aggressive situation, to how to diffuse that and how to deal with that? I mean, there is obviously courses.
Yep.
I imagine you can do that.
Yep. So, we run, we use an organisation called CERT, and I think some of our counsellors have been through the CERT training itself. So, we try and take as many of our front or customer-facing staff through that CERT training. Over the last 2 years, I think we've invested, a large sum of money to get as many as we can through that training. And what CERT gives us, it gives us some tools on how to extract ourselves from situations. Talks about proper risk assessment and proper mechanisms and to retract yourself from a conversation and how to foresee and understand, when a situation is going to get out of hand as such. So most certainly, from a training perspective, we do quite a bit of that. And then, we do use our senior staff in particular, so our more experienced staff. So, for example, the compliance team, they usually send a senior with a newer officer out to customers and so on, so that they, get to learn. So it's a bit of a, kind of mentorship through their first couple of months working for the organisation, and sometimes up to a year they'll spend just with a more senior officer to go and attend particularly difficult customers.
Right, thank you. So if there is a situation that arose, and you don't need to give us the details, of course, but if an individual was involved in a particular incident that was, a bit nasty, you will have a debrief and see what, you mentioned that before, Amy, about how it arose, what caused it, and how it was resolved, I suppose.
Yes, yeah. So, I can use a couple of good examples. So for example, our compliance team is most probably the team that gets, a large percentage of our issues, and it's by nature of the job that they do. So, they have systems and mechanisms in place to most certainly debrief. So they'll usually debrief as a team. They, and they'll look at scenarios and identify whether they could have done that scenario better. And obviously from that they will then put in some further controls if necessary, or if there's further training required, they'll come and see the health and safety team to see if we can get that sorted out. Most certainly, at all levels, there's generally a discussion at the health and safety meetings that they're having, with their team meetings, opportunity to debrief there, and most certainly at our health and safety committee meetings, it's always something that gets brought up, and it's always a topic that gets discussed. It is something that is addressed at various levels across the organisation. And it's not just, and because there is this heightened awareness, and I think, because we're doing so much reporting at the moment, myself and Carolyn, the health and safety team as such, we've been injecting ourselves into a lot of these conversations. So, hopefully our teams are getting some value out of that too.
Thanks, Paul. Mr. Chairman.
Amy, did you want to add?
Well, yeah, I was just going to add to that. And the other thing that we offer our staff as well is we've got an employee assistance program as well, which, if people have been subject to an incident like that, we've got the support available to them. That wasn't what I was going to say, actually. What I was going to say was just, coming back to Councillor Gibson's point, which I think was, do we create some of our own problems? Which I think was maybe some of the subtext there. And sometimes I think, yep, maybe we do. We are in the process of writing a customer strategy, which is going to look at all aspects and areas, of our business. Sometimes people might be irritated with us because, we worded a letter a particular way, or they got 3 things through the post rather than 1, or they tried to call us and they couldn't get through to speak to a human being. So, we are looking at that, going to be looking at that, still being written, across all aspects of our business to help improve the way that we do engage with our customers, to remove some of those pain points that might, lead people to become irritated in the first place. That's not to say that we condone responding in an aggressive way by any stretch of the imagination, but actually, can we be easier to do business with is one of the things that we're conscious of and that we're having a look at.
Thank you.
Bruce, would you like to come to the table?
So just to add a little bit of context, it's been highlighted some of the things I'm currently overseeing, deal with this issue probably most frequently within the organisation. One of the things we're really trying to drive is you can mitigate a whole lot of risk if you do a good desktop exercise in advance before you head out into the field. head out in the field just winging it and sort of relying on your instincts, that's not a good tactic. We run a system called Take 5 where the manager talks through with the staff members what the issues are, who they're dealing with. Other things that are quite relevant, things like weather conditions, how long it might take you to get there, how safe you are when you get there, can you safely transport yourself across the site? All those sorts of things are relevant. The other thing that is relevant also is a bit of situational awareness around the context for our communities. We don't operate in a bubble here, and it's important for people to understand that there's a lot of our customers under significant financial pressure at the moment. Those sorts of things are relevant, and it relates to how you present. If you show some empathy for that, you tend to get a little bit of a better reaction than if you're totally oblivious to all those sorts of pressures. So trying to mitigate those risks in advance before you head out deals with a whole lot of risk.
Just appreciate that. Michael, did you have a?
No, just
Yep.
adding to what Bruce said, which is very good, but at the other end of the scale, with particularly aggressive activity, we can report it to the police, and we can trespass them off the building. So the safety of our staff is paramount, but that's sort of what Bruce is doing. That also helps on the other side to de-escalate things. But occasionally, not very often, you can get a situation which is a serious physical threat, which is totally not acceptable.
Absolutely. No, I think it's been a very worthwhile discussion, and thank you, Paul, for presenting the paper. Thank you, Bruce, for talking. We certainly see the seriousness of it and just the numbers where they're lying, even if it is more reporting, it is good reporting to get, and the fact that there's work underway with the exec team in terms of how it is getting managed going forward. So yes, it'd be good to, I'm sure will be kept updated in the papers just in terms of progress. Thank you.
Happy to remove that report, Jim.
Thank you, Lyndall. Seconded by Morris. In favour? Aye. It's passed. Thank you. So certainly risk management, and really diving deep into one specific one, which was very interesting to read, I thought. So thank you for writing it very well in terms of just bringing it to life as well. I think it's one where you could certainly envisage what's happening out in the field and therefore really relate to it. So I'm looking forward to a good discussion on this one. So I'll just get you, Paul, just to touch on some highlights, and then we can.
Sure. So thank you very, very much. I'll take the report as read. Just a few things that I'd just like to highlight. One is this paper and this dive did not include our diving operations. So diving operations, I see it as almost a standalone, and that's something I'm working on at the moment to I'm still in sort of kind of two minds whether whether we should be taking that on as an additional critical risk, or whether we just treat it separately, because it does fall under various it's got its own specific controls and very specific requirements as such. So I've kept it out of this deep dive in particular. So as you can tell from the paper itself, as an organisation, we do spend a lot of time around water, and most certainly there are times when we're actually in and on the water. The functions are quite specific to divisions, and a lot of our divisions are using various ways of managing and controlling the hazard itself. You will note that a large majority of the controls fall into the more sort of kind of what we term as administrative. So it's around trainings and SOPs and risk assessments and things like that, as opposed to actually eliminating the risk as much as possible, the hazard as much as possible. One of the things that I didn't touch on in the paper, and I thought I would highlight that for you, I'm sure one of you might have the question, is around the usage of drones. Now, we are still sort of in the infancy of using drones to do some of our monitoring for us. So, and a good example is our catchment team have been using our drones to, monitor river mouths and openings and things like that. And really, it's a great tool where it steps you completely away from the hazard itself and using technology to step in and do the work for you. So that's something that that I didn't necessarily touch in on this paper, but I thought I'd raise that because that's, as I said, we're still very much in the infancy in the use of drones, but I can foresee that being something that we'll use on a more regular basis. Obviously, we do have a fleet of boats that we use. We have some very stringent controls around how we manage those boats. A lot of that is legislative requirement that we need to have. And our harbour master is obviously responsible for the training and overseeing the training program for our skippers on our vessels, which keeps it, pretty clean for us because, we have the direct influence on how we're doing our training and got some assurance around that control that we're actually delivering on those good outcomes from working on water as such. Right, that was about all I really wanted to highlight. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Paul. And I certainly just the one line here that you've got, which is around that top event. Before I open up for questions, an event is the moment control over a hazard is lost, and the most credible top event that covers most hazards working in and around water is the loss of control and work becomes overcome, inundated, or immersed by water. So I think we probably understand that just in terms of our top event, our top risk that we're looking to address here. And I think it goes back to our conversation earlier on risk appetite too, for our parts of it. But John, start us off.
Thank you, Chair. I just read through the report and just the thought came that some drownings are quite often the rescuer, not the person being rescued, and what sort of approach is taken there for, I guess, extra training to manage that situation so we don't end up with that being the outcome.
Yeah, so if I think about scenarios where that could potentially happen, I'm thinking of scenarios where we have kayakers in the water. So we usually do have that with a two up. So there's always someone observing from the shore and someone on the kayak or on the water. So for that particular scenario, we do training and exercising. So once a year, our SIOs go out and they actually spend a day out practicing the skill of using throw bags and instigating a rescue. So generally speaking, I would say that everyone is aware of the rescue method, but I think for them the key thing is notifying and instigating response as such from elsewhere to assist with any rescue. But as I said, they are training, they are practicing it and exercising it at least annually. And then part of our skippers training, they have to demonstrate a man overboard exercise, so part of their training, and that's an annual exercise that they do, so they actually get to exercise that annually also. So, yep, you're right, often it is the rescuer that gets themselves into trouble, but I think, by rehearsing the drills and going through the drills, it does give us some sort of comfort that there will be, a reduced chance of that happening. But, not to say that it doesn't happen. It's down.
Control situation on this.
Yeah, ultimately it's down to the individual themselves, yeah.
Alistair.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Paul, you talk about on the bottom of page 41 about people out waiting on their own. There's probably two things there. What is a safeguard, if anything happens out there? And secondly, how do you know when they get home?
Yep. So we use it's a couple of things we do. One is we have very strict requirement around when you will be wading in water. So it's depth based and on flow based. So using our assessment tools that we have available to us, so we can quickly identify the flow of the river. We can most certainly identify the depth. So if you can't see the bottom, little telltale signs that you can use as part of your risk assessment. Those are all kind of upfront before we even enter the water. So getting all of those assessments done, making sure that when we do enter the water, that it's safe to do so. The other piece is that we use our Get Home Safe application, and that Get Home Safe, we can use InReach Garmin as a secondary device, and that device is waterproof, so they can actually take it into the water with them. It does have a immediate SOS, not to say that that's going to bring response quick enough, but we are able to check in and check out. So we've got some rules and regulations around checking in and checking out. And I know, for example, our SIOs that go into the water, they do that before they go in, and then they check out again when they've come out of the water. So they are always notifying that they've been in and out.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay. And I'd just like to follow up. So are PFDs, the personal flotation devices, a bit like a life jacket really, are they required to be into the water, or?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So it's mandatory to once you enter the water. So we don't necessarily stipulate when we're walking alongside water, because some of it is, we're walking through, next to a stream that is, up to your ankles. But most certainly where there's water that warrants, by depth and by flow strength and so on, wearing flotation devices, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to hear. Great. That was one of my, so I can see that being a key risk mitigation.
Yes, yeah, and I think just by wearing a flotation device, I think it's betters your chances by 5 times or something like that of survival. Something to that effect.
I could see that from reading this, there was sort of a lot of training that gets done. There's some sort of risk assessments and manuals and the likes, but then this is trying to narrow it down to a few sort of key actions, in terms of everyone who enters the water wears a personal flotation device, and that's just sort of one key action that will really reduce the risk.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So at the end of the day, this risk gets rated in terms of its seriousness, and just so everyone's aware, it still has stayed at the highest risk rating, even after we apply all the controls that we can currently, or after we've applied the controls that we currently have. So pretty important that us as a committee understand that in terms of that health and safety risk to our staff, what is currently in place still coming out as a.
Do you think, regardless of whatever policy we put in place or whatever training or whatever facilities are provided, they're working in the environment, and that's just the nature of the beast, but we have to keep bettering what we can do, but acceptance is something.
That's that risk appetite.
Yeah, I wonder. Paul is. I'm trying to. I'll have a think as you're talking. So yeah, do you want to try and answer that?
Yeah. So I mean, and you're right. It's about continuously improving, and I think there's definitely, as I said, by introducing some further technology, if we the less we do in the water, the better. So if as technology advances, let's make sure we've got a finger on that pulse and use that technology. So for example, and we're already embracing a lot of that. For example, a lot of our monitoring sites now all have cameras on them. So things like that. So we don't necessarily have to go and or we can see straight away if it's damaged, things like that. So it's about using technology that's available and using that to eliminate the need to actually get into the water. And as I said, a majority of our controls being very, being administrative, that to try and get some sort of elimination would be good.
Absolutely. Morris.
He's thinking about that. We have seen in the past where methods, Chris Jenkins, I think, gave us a picture of how you could measure the speed of the flow from a camera, noting, the bubbles and things that go down and measure them. So that's a good remote sensing method. Are there more things that we could do in that area that you would like, but you are limited by the cost of these things?
Offhand, I can't think of anything really. I would suggest that, Chris is most probably, he's most probably a leader in his field. So, if there's something out there, I'm pretty sure he's either thought about it or is most probably in the process of purchasing it. So I would suggest, there is definitely the technology, as it comes around and comes live. I'm pretty sure Chris is onto it, for example. But I can't think of anything offhand other than, just more recently using drones more often.
Yeah, I'm just thinking what you said, Mr. Chairman, even though there's a whole lot of stuff here we're made aware of and that we're doing, it's still quite a high risk. And I'm thinking that there could be more, more satellite technology, other kinds of things like that where we could measure water quality, for example, in ways without having to go out there and stick a jar in the water and pull it out.
Trying to do that.
Rachel, we did, yeah.
Perhaps if I could just add to the discussion, it's a really exciting area actually, and not only Chris but many members of the science team are looking at different tools and techniques and what can we use going forward. There is a full review of the State of the Environment Monitoring Network being kicked off this year, and so some of that will be consideration of what digital tools can be brought into the mix, and so you are going to hear more about some of the suggestions and ideas that the team have in that space over the coming months.
Okay, great. Amy?
Yeah, I just wanted to come back to the risk appetite comment in relation to this, and often health and safety risks end up getting rated quite highly because the consequence is a very bad day for someone, a life-altering event, or even death, and actually to sort of put some sort of judgment on how much of that you're willing to tolerate or not is not a comfortable, palatable exercise. So, given that that's often the outcome of health and safety, or can be an outcome of health and safety gone wrong, our despite all the mitigations that we might have to put in place, the residual rankings, risk rankings for health and safety events, remains high. If that reason, Paul, and I noticed that you used the words, but I just wondered if you wanted to remind the committee about the hierarchy of controls and why we talk to elimination first and foremost, as opposed to the more administrative controls.
Yeah, so the hierarchy of controls being think of it as a triangle as such. So your pinnacle, your highest control in the hierarchy is elimination. So, eliminating the hazard completely. So no need to be exposed to it. Sitting below that is, kind of either substituting the hazard with something else. So, if you think of a chemical, instead of using this bad chemical, let's use this good chemical instead. Looking at, next down the hierarchy as such, some of those engineering controls, so things where we can engineer out some of the hazard. And then fitting into the more sort of kind of standard controls which have a lower impact on the hazard itself is our administrative controls. So those are usually things like, SOPs, training, documents, procedures and things like that. And then right at the bottom of that triangle, which is the last and most probably the least impactful, is things like PPE and that sort of stuff. So we try and apply the hierarchy as much as possible. Now, even with a hazard like working in and around water, you can't necessarily change the consequence, because the consequence is something, if we think about water, someone being exposed to it, inundated, drowning is most probably, a credible consequence. But what we're trying to do really is bring down the likelihood. The thing we can control is the likelihood. So by reducing that likelihood as much as possible, that's where we, that's where we will see some risk reduction. But you're right, we won't see the risk reduction that is going to get at anything out of that extreme or high range as such, without actually eliminating the hazard itself. So the more we can avoid going into the water, the better.
Right. Thank you very much, Paul. It is a great paper, great discussion. Certainly, when you're putting together your business case, Rachel, for the new technology improvements for monitoring, you can reference back to this committee and say from the health and safety perspective, we were very pro going in that direction for looking after staff. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Like to move. Morris, seconded. Alistair, in favour? Passed. Thank you.
Because you must have spent hours and hours. You've never something. You do have something on you that cool.
All right, agenda item number 9.6, our second deep dive. Just shows the value in that last discussion of these deep dives, both from sort of a understanding from a governance point of view, but also asking the right questions to make sure we're going in the right direction. So, Amy, this one here, resilience to disasters.
Yes.
I thought this paper traversed a number of different topics.
Yes, this was a bit of a behemoth to sort of grip up and talk about. Actually, it was a bit of a team effort with my colleagues as well, because it touches on just a huge number of parts of what we do and how we do it. So it relates to the work that we do as an organisation in terms of our outward-facing work. It talks to what we do internally in terms of when there is some sort of emergency event, how we respond to that as an organisation. It speaks to the business continuity planning that we need to have, and which we've talked about in this committee, to enable us to do our work during an emergency event. And it also speaks to our involvement in civil defence as well. So yes, there was a huge number of parts there, and I think that the key thing first and foremost is to understand that we live in a highly hazardous region of the world. Actually, I think we're number 2 in the risk charts for likelihood of natural events, and certainly in Southland, those events being risk of earthquake-related tsunami and flooding. So quite a bit for us to think about. The work of this council, amongst other things, is to manage floodplains, catchments, river flow, waters, and community resilience to the same through civil defence. So I've talked a little bit in the paper about the work that we do in that area. Like I said, we've talked about our business continuity planning and civil defence. So I've tried to cover the main points in the paper. I'm probably interested in questions that the committee might have, and also looking at the remainder of my colleagues down the back of the room who may be available to answer questions if we've got them.
John.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I guess, we were talking about flood banks and risk, and I guess a lot of that could be in just our constituents' understanding of what their roles are for protection, and maybe some clarity around at what level can we protect to, because we all know there will be a catastrophic flood one day that we just cannot cope with, and I guess some clarity would help the community better prepare themselves individually would be the responsible thing I feel we should do as a council, rather than saying we think we can handle this. We should have a bit more clarity on the actual numbers. We've got the data on flows, so I don't see why we can't bring a bit more clarity to it.
I'm going to ask the question that step. So, do we provide that clarity at the moment in terms of numbers? In terms of
And look, I'll get some advice on this, but I guess what I'd say is it's really hard to be precise. That is the one thing. It's not like it's definitely going to happen. It might. We're relying on the inputs that we get into the modelling, so it's working with the best information that we've got to provide the best advice at the time. I acknowledge that we've got a conversation internally, and I think through the LTP, through the infrastructure strategy, talking about how we describe the levels of protection in terms of our flood banks, you know, instead of return periods, what does that mean for people? How do we make that information accessible? I also think there's an ongoing, emerging, continuing conversation about what it means to be ready for events. We know that they're going to increase in severity and intensity when we're thinking about, you know, climate change events. What can communities do? What can individuals do to be ready for those?
Supplementary to that, please. I suppose it links back to the insurance conversation and all that stuff. So there's complexity there, and
Yeah.
I think if we can make our position absolutely clear, you know, I think that's as a regional council, it's our responsibility to be straight up with it.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Nicole?
Yes, look, after having been in East Valley in the last month and seeing what we've had to deal with, is the report had 47 recommendations, many of which are applicable to us all. I think, you know, we've got a pretty good setup here, but one of the questions I asked earlier about Antenna was, has it interacted? Because that was one of the failings where when the communication network went down and the modelling was out of whack, that people couldn't communicate. So there's certainly a lot of learnings there, but I think we've also got to remember and value that the shared service of emergency management we have in Southland, not all regions have dedicated staff. So in the case of emergency, you're pulling people out of another job. And we can always do better, but I think we're reasonably well set up, particularly with working with communities, because we know in the event of a disaster, they may be on their own for a week, and local communities having to look after themselves. So there's always learnings out of a tragedy like the Cyclone Gabriel. And I think that we're probably reasonably well placed, but we can't rest on our laurels. We have to make sure we're as well prepared as we can be, because eventually we will have an event that is going to overtop, and our focus will be on ensuring human life is not lost, and people don't like to leave their homes. So it's having those things in place to make sure that we've got enough advance warning to move people when we have to.
Alistair, thank you, Nicole.
Yeah, I think you're right, Nick. I'll back you up on that. But basically, we've got to start putting the message out there that it's going to happen. You know, after looking at Napier and Hastings, they didn't expect it. But we've got fairly large sort of catchment areas in our rivers, and it's just going to happen one day. The other thing that sort of I just wanted to ask Amy, did you consider reputational risk in this? Now, it's not probably directly related to resilience to disasters, but to get that information out there is going to be easier if we're respected.
Just, can you ask me the question a different way? I'm not sure. So you asked me if considered reputational risk, but I'm trying to understand that in relation to what you're saying about getting information out there.
Well, what I'm saying is that did you consider reputational risk? Because that's one thing, we need to have a good reputation to actually be trusted to get information out there and to get the message.
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, actually, to be fair, no, not at the front end. I was thinking about it at the back end in terms of consequence for not, you know, what if we haven't done it right and if the event crystallises, potential reputational risk if we haven't, you know, if there's some things where we've been found wanting, but I didn't think about it at the front end, and it's a point well made. Thank you. Yep.
Bruce, please come forward. As Councillor Pendleton has correctly identified in his Councillor Gibson, there's always going to be an event that's going to be in excess of your capacity to manage. And probably part of the managing expectations in the future is making people aware that our flood protection schemes have a capacity, and that, I think, for example, of the Wahaupai scheme, where I was old enough to remember the 84 floods, and now when you talk to a lot of people about the 84 floods, they don't know what you're talking about, and they assume that they look at the stock bank that's forever in a day going to protect their property from any future damage. If you get a Gabrielle scale event, that may not be the case. So I think probably some of the preemptive comms that we need to do linked to people's personal readiness is also around conveying quite clearly what the capacity of our protection schemes are, because that's been an issue right around the country, is that, no scheme is necessarily going to protect you against a Gabrielle scale, a 1 in 500-year event or something like that. It's difficult for councils to build infrastructure to that capacity, so people need to understand that there is a possibility that the scheme that has been protecting them in the past may not always protect them in the future, not only for their existing property, but for investment decisions around where people build and that sort of thing in the future. So there's probably a preemptive opportunity, which is being done, but maybe could be escalated a little bit more around communicating the capacity of our flood protection schemes.
Thank you, Bruce.
Yeah, can I just add
Yes,
to
no,
that,
yes, yes.
Chairman, just, it became clear to me during the LGP consultation period that we needed to make it more clear that the existing capacity is first and foremost to preserve life and give them time to get away if need be, and secondly was perhaps their property. And there was a concern that wasn't the right way around from some people, which surprised me. But that adds to your point, Bruce, about managing the expectations of what the flood banks are actually going to be able to do. It's actually to preserve life, first and foremost.
John?
Yeah, and just out of the back of the LTP, I think some of the language that was suggested to maybe use to describe what these floods, where their risk sits, was quite interesting one. There was a recommendation that made me talk about as a percentage rather than a yearly event, just so people have got absolute clarity. Look, 1 in 10%, 10% chance that this could happen, rather than a 1 in 10 year or 1 in 100, I think, because that allows us to move with the levels, because as higher rainfall events happen, we need to adjust our scale so it keeps up with relatively solid.
It's a good point. You used to hear about return periods was the term used, and then it became AEP, or annual acceptance probability. Putting the language in terms that people can readily relate to is an important part of the communication.
Thank you.
Boris?
Yes, just to turn slightly on that, while we have a big flood going on, we do have to keep this emergency management centre going. And I see on your page 52, there's a paragraph about energy security, and that we do have a diesel generator here if the power goes out. But I wonder if I could draw your attention to some information that's just come out recently from an Australian energy analyst called Saul Griffith, who's written a small book along with the chief economist of the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, Paul Conway, and it's been reviewed by Jeff Simmons, who's a chief economist with the Parliamentary Commission for the Environment. And this is about rooftop solar backed up by batteries, and saying how that this is a solution nationally to our energy shortage, but also it's very good from an economic point of view as well. While the costs are high initially, as soon as you've got the kit in place, you're not paying for the power anymore. And at times of a flood event, if we had that with battery backup, may be able to keep us going a bit longer. We might need to use a diesel generator of it, but we may not need to use it so much. And from an economic point of view, it makes a lot of sense. So this little book is called, and I don't know if you watch Jack Tame on Sunday mornings, but he interviewed this guy, Saul Griffiths, on last Sunday. So you can see that on TVNZ Plus if you wanted to, but it was very good and backed up by these guys who know a lot about the economy. And so that could be not only something to reduce our risk of not being able to function in a storm or an event, but also be an economic advantage to us in the long term.
I certainly know in the last couple of years, that I think it's an American company that has been able to incorporate solar power technology into roof tiles.
Yeah.
I was hoping for a wonderful investment opportunity, but it's a private company, so that was the end of my investing dreams. But you know, that technology is coming. Actually, that point there about that paragraph about energy security, it wasn't quite an afterthought, but it came in at the end of the paper because in the last couple of weeks, maybe 3 or 4 weeks now, you know, there were lots of reports about the hydro lakes being low. And actually we sort of take it for granted that the lights go off for 5 minutes or half a day and the generator's on. But actually, you know, as we start to think about that at scale across the country, you know, the impact on the smelter, for example, having to, you know, shut down pot lines, you know, that the impact of having low hydro lakes and energy shortages. They were talking about the potential of brownouts versus blackouts, but you know, it's been a long time, I think, as a country since we faced that stuff down, and you know, actually beginning to think about actually, well, what that mean for us as an organisation if that started to happen. So it's a good point. We need a new roof.
No, I was thinking that as part of our review into our accommodation into the future, that is something that should be considered.
Yep, absolutely.
Resilience of the building.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
So,
And it's not,
Alistair?
we're pricing it up for a house at the moment. We'll get the whole thing, batteries and all, for 25 grand.
Right.
So it used to be 40, 60, 80, but it seemed to have come down.
Yeah, this book is really worthwhile, or the interview with it. Okay.
Sorry, at the risk of extending the conversation some more, 2 quick things, I think. The PRIMAP paragraph,
Yes.
on page 53,
Yes.
a little bit of a mystery for me.
Yep.
It was obviously she said, in inverted commas, a worthwhile thing, and without a host persons per se, it's fallen by the wayside. Is that something that we need to upskill somebody on, or are we just going to let it sit, or is it not as good as we thought it was, or
No.
what's the deal?
It's an important. I'd argue that it's an important business continuity tool. You know, even if anybody's off sick and you need someone to come in, they can. How do you do that? Pick that up and do it. Oh, look, I think there's a couple of things. You know, one, competing for people's time. It's just, you know, what else are the people who are also being the champions being asked to do, and how do we assess the importance of PROMAP against everything else they have to do? So that's a conversation that I think we need to have, and it's not just for one person to do it, right? That person's the champion for everybody else, but you know, I then pick up that comment and I amplify that across everybody else's jobs and attention as well. You know, it is a challenge sometimes, just juggling all the bits of your job, and if you're out there doing your job and it's just like, please could you take 5 minutes, or it's often longer than that, to write down the processes that explain that. It's when you've got 1,000,001 other pressures, sometimes it's the admin, because it's not urgent. It goes to the side. Yeah, it's an open conversation for us about how do we get that back on track.
Yeah, cool. And my other comment was just about the effectiveness of existing controls.
Yeah.
And you know, there are 9 bullet points there.
Yeah.
When I first saw the list without reading through them, I went, gee, that's a lot. But actually, you know, a good number of those are in train already, right? So. Oh,
look, and actually, it's a really big topic.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, and it's.
So next steps, I guess, is my question for some of those. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. Is there any in particular? Look, you know, the first bullet point, for example, was pretty much the subject of our LTP, and is the focus of the work in the catchment operations team. You know, we've got a live and very active regional council network, the special interest groups, Te Kahika, certainly they have their policy people as well. So I can't remember if it was yourself or Nicole that mentioned the Mike Bush report and the Hawke's Bay report. Bunch of actions there that are not unique to us. Actually, how do we go about addressing those in a joined up way? It's there. This is a rolling program of work, some of which we're talking about in this committee.
Well, I'm just underlining all the words that mean it's happening still.
Yeah.
There's one in every sentence.
Yeah, and I think we've either talked about them and as a council through the LTP or actually in this committee in terms of the work that we've got going on in those places.
Yeah, I guess Andrew, with your experience, do you have any comment about it, where that's all sitting and
So
progress, etc.?
yes, so I can certainly see how it's traversed everything from the emergency management system to the state of the assets, and so it just touches on all parts of the organisation, and so I think everything that's been said today is right. It's just about lifting the bar further and further with every area that we've touched on, and then business continuity does fall into the space of running scenario events, which I've been involved in the past, where you actually say, okay, let's pretend right now that an event has happened, and how do we react to it? So you can actually go and play through a scenario live, and with councillors and staff around too, and that can be quite good to play out. So to find where your gaps are.
A big task.
It's a big task.
Yes. So there are
Look, the other thing that I'll probably make about this risk, because we're talking about natural hazards, right? We can't necessarily stop them from happening. So a lot of this is really about preparedness, around what we would do and how we would respond after the impact, after the event.
Yeah, sorry, Chairman. The other part of that is the recovery part after, which we haven't really looked at yet. But there's the what happens during the event and the managing of, but then there's that latent getting back to.
How long does it take you?
Oh, look, and actually, I'm looking at a couple of my civil defence colleagues down the back of the room. I think, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that would probably be the area I understand that is least well done as a country.
Absolutely.
And the size and the scale is phenomenal, and I certainly know that was one of the things that Wilma reflected on when they went and did the pre-conference tour for LGNZ. They're up in the East Valley, and the size and scale of the work that continues to go on up there. And I'd probably say you only need to look at Christchurch. 10 plus years on, and there's still it looks like in some places things happened just the other day. So it's not just an issue for us, particularly challenging for more remote communities as well, which probably we have a few of, thinking about that. Lots to think about in this space. Did Paul or Bruce, do you want to add anything to that particular comment?
Looking back, 2 years since both Paul and myself were involved in the February 2020 flood, and that's probably a local example, which I'm taking no credit for it, but Emergency Management Southland managed the event really well. We got good support from right across the country on that, but the recovery aspect of that, which was an event that didn't play out as badly as potentially it could have. The air stock banks withstood a 2,400 cubic flow pretty well, but if that hadn't happened and there'd been a failure and you had widespread flooding around the Mataura and Gore catchments or that sort of thing, you could be into many months of recovery. Even as it was with February 2020, there probably was a recovery phase that I think would have gone on for best part of 6 months more. And there's all other elements of that, like the funding aspects that need to play out. So it's certainly an issue that various reviews of the Civil Defence Emergency Management Act have highlighted as an area that probably doesn't get the level of attention that others of the 4Rs have previously got. We have got a new recovery manager for CDM Group, Adrian.
Yes, Adrian Humphreys.
Yeah, Adrian Humphreys.
Appointed yet, but
Okay.
he's,
It was in
I think
that
he's-
recent.
he's got the experience.
Yeah. So quite an experienced person who's recently joined Southern District Council as staff, but has a capacity in that role for the management Southern. So there's some capacity there, but it's certainly, as has been pointed out by council, a big issue for even a medium scale event.
All right. Thank you very much to everyone, Amy for preparing and all the rest for talking as well. Yes, so it's a good discussion. I think one where we've highlighted that what's the key word? I think rolling progress.
Rolling program of work.
Rolling program of work.
I think I've quoted it right there.
Yep, rolling program of work. So thank you for that, Amy. Someone to move? Morris, and seconded by John. Favour?
Aye.
Against, passed. Thank you. So moving to 9.7, page 55, our insurance update. All right, Tracy.
Thank you. So Tanya's up on the screen there. She'll be talking us through it. I'll be available for questions.
Yes, we do. We've got Tanya on screen. Great to see you, Tanya. Hear us. Great. So to just give a brief introduction first, and then we can.
Yes, thank you, yeah, and good afternoon. I'm going to be sharing with you our insurance update for August. This is the second update this year. Earlier in the year, we provided you with an appraisal of what was going on in the risk part of our insurance portfolio, the need to review before the end of June. We were in fact put in a position where we needed to very urgently review our liability insurance. So we're coming back to you now with an additional update and asking the committee to receive this report. I'm going to assume that the report has been read, Chair, and just want to highlight some things. Actually, they sort of fit in with what you've been discussing. If I can add to your previous discussion on natural disasters, it's been the pleasure of being here in 2020, February 2020. And then Tracy was very deeply involved with the insurances at that time and the claims that went on for 12 months afterwards. That small event cost this council between $6 and $7 million. And so they're not insignificant. And they do take a long time, and it was actually 2 years. It was a good 12 months of insurance claim work that Tracy undertook with others, GM at the time, and 2 years worth of work in the catchment area to get on top of that. So critical that we understand that and be prepared, both obviously in the planning for people, but also assets. So insurance and risks associated with what we're talking about is top of mind actually for the regional council CEs. I understand it's right up on that list of their top 5 things that they're considering in response to the events that we've had and in response to the change in the industry and the expectations of the public. And what you've also alluded to is the public's need to know actually how this is all impacting them as well, what their place is in the insurance arena. So Amy and I were both at a corporate SIG for regional councils on Friday, and the breakout group that I was in, risk was actually top of the list. Risks, assessing risks, and then ultimately working through the financial impacts. So that's the background. The paper lays out for you the changes that we've been working through. Every year we undertake a very detailed review of our insurance portfolio, what we're insuring and why, what's going on in the market, and ensuring that we've got the right values in place. And it's no different this year, except that we've already been put in a position where we've had to change our liability insurance. One of the aspects that we're possibly putting, I won't say more work into, but it's becoming more apparent that it's not urgent but incredibly important, is the valuation of things like flood banks. So we've had in the past asset valuations undertaken by engineers, and then we've increased those by a CPI adjustment. The engineering team have done their valuation. We have engaged Aon and their valuers to complete a full reappraisal of the assets that can consist of our flood banks and our dams. So we're still awaiting that report, and we are putting some pressure on them to actually complete that, because it's critical to this assessment of our asset valuations. So at the moment, we're working with historical values. Those values are 105 million. We're, of course, insured for only 40% of that. So the risk to Aon is 40%. The risk to the government, it was covered by the government through NEMA, is 60%. We might have said before that Aon take this and they place this with hundreds of millions, if not billions, of other infrastructure assets in the international market, and they're doing that right now. They're in London negotiating the best possible cover and the best possible price for us as part of that South Island Collective. As I said, I've mentioned the flood banks. The other key piece of infrastructure that's new for us is our Stead Street pump station. So it has been insured at cost, and we took over that insurance from Fulton Hogan when they handed over the keys. Aon are also insisting that they value that as well. So they'll be down in the near future to put an insurance valuation onto that. Other than that, there's many other assets that we have, and Tracy's studiously working through those, ensuring that we've got photos of our property, that's our buildings, our houses, our boats, all of living at pieces, and ensuring that we've got current data and allowing us to have the best possible valuations. Tracy, have I overlooked anything in the description of the process we're going through at the moment?
Thanks, Tanya. I think you've really summarised that very well. Just one thing, possibly the excess and deductibles, we're having a good look at that, and we're asking for two options: a lower deductible, a higher deductible, what the premium is going to be, and we'll make a decision on that. It's probably for me.
Thank you. Yes, and I don't know if you've found this in your own insurance counsellors, but I've tried to lower my insurance by lowering the excess or increasing the excess, and it actually has made very little difference, much to my frustration. So we will do that. Ultimately, we need to make a recommendation to the council on who's going to carry the risk with these excesses. And sorry, Tracy, I was going to mention also the total loss on the flood banks. We had was it 30 million? And we've increased that.
Yeah, now there's on that summary of council insurance health, the first page. Infrastructure, top line, it says, it's in bold, obviously the environment south and sublimit cap is 35 million. Is that what you're talking about, Tanya?
Yes, but I understand that we've actually increased that.
Yes, yes. So this is what is in place at the moment. And when they go to London now, we ask for up to 60 And they'll just come back with yes or no and give us some options.
So some years ago, we had an engineering firm do what we're talking about. They gave us a valuation and they went through the 20-year loss, 50, 100 and 200 to 500-year loss scenarios, and what we are prepared to carry as a risk for the council. You know, are we insuring for it? Well, would it ever happen that we have 50% loss of assets? You know, what event would create that, or what event would create a 10% loss of assets? So that's that risk profile that we're yet to complete, but I'm pleased to tell you that it is underway, and that the valuation stage is nearing completion, I'm advised. Are there any questions, Chair, on the report as it's presented?
Thank you very much, Tanya. Yes, we'll start with Alistair.
Through you, Chair. Is there any indication, Tanya, that by moving away from Marshalls and taking everything to Aon, that we're going to get the same cover at about the same price?
No, we haven't been able to achieve that, and neither has any of the other councils. So we were put in a difficult position, 3 or 4 weeks before the expiry. Aon are a broker, so they work in the same market as Marsh. The question we've got to put before renewal next year, Councillor, is are there other insurers? They haven't, underwriters is what I'm looking to say. They have placed us with some very big companies here, Berkshire Hathaway, and I know that Greater Wellington have used Berkshire Hathaway. But we need to ask the question, can we go anywhere else for liability? The market for liability is extremely difficult. Asset insurance is, according to Aon, asset insurance, the ability to underwrite and even the premiums have stabilised a little because they went up excessively over the last 3 years. But the one thing that is getting really hard to place is things like harbour master, wreck removal, and public liability. One would argue that $15 million of public liability is not a lot, but it was the first tranche and it was available to all of us. We had that was available to council. So yes, there's more work to do on that to ensure that we've got the right levels of in the liability area and determine what the right level is.
Thank you.
Well,
Boris?
thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's pretty much on the same line, and I just assume you've done the best you can, even though there's considerable reduction in the cover as well as an increase in the excess. I don't quite understand the paragraph that's 2 above that, the one just below table 1. Something about working with other councils, operating on a pool basis rather than, can you explain that?
Sorry, Councillor, which page is it?
We're on page 56, just under table 1. It talks about the primary layer and the excess layer, which we operate on a pool basis.
Yeah, so we have had insurance previously on a pool, and exactly the same. So we had a smaller amount that was specifically for us that we were guaranteed to be insured for. And it was a similar number, to be fair, 15 million. But we had a pool in addition where the group of councils at that time that were managed by Marsh had a sort of a one event total pool. So it was 300 million in it, and they said you're all insured for 300 million. The person that claims it this year gets to be insured for 300 million. And next year you've got 300 million available, or next event or whatever it is. So we haven't been able to put that back in place, but that's the kind of thing we're looking for, to work with other councils to say, can we share a total pool for extreme events? At the moment, as a result of the Marsh change, we've all got this segmented sort of 15 million each. So it's a definite benefit and something that we do want to get back to.
And so under that scenario, it would be fine if it's a localized event, I assume.
Yes.
But yeah, the risk is it's for ones that aren't localized. Would that be right?
I think I understand what you're saying. It's a bit like the geography.
If it was an earthquake that went through the South Island and through to Wellington, then there'd be a lot of councils applying to use up that 300 million.
Yes, yes, and so there's all this. It's a what do they call the people that do this calculation? Risk.
Actuarials.
Actuarials. Yeah, they've got to work through those risks, and the benefit we have with our asset insurance is exactly that diversification of by way of geography. At the end of the day, if it is an AF8, of course, it picks up a huge number of councils for your floods and weather damage and storms. Geographical location is critical for spreading the risk.
And I think with insurance, it's about having your eyes wide open to just knowing what you're insured for and what you're not. John?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I guess just something that sort of came out of the Esk Valley was having an insurance company insure a council while also insuring the claimants on the other side. Now, is there a conflict we're looking at here that we need to consider?
I'm just not sure, John. The councillor, the statement on, was it conflict?
Well, just the fact that if we're going with an insurance company that the general public there's a large stakeholding of the general public that insure with that insurer, and being that we are, our role is that going to lead to tensions or issues if we ever have to claim at a large scale?
I hadn't thought about that, to be fair. I'll just take you back to the conversation that I heard you discussing earlier, which was about working through, and Bruce talked about this, preparedness and understanding everybody's role and responsibility. And to be clear on who's doing what and who's responsible for what. One of the things I've asked often is, what is the council's responsibility? Or does the council have responsibility to anybody on the other side of the flood bank? And the answer is not, I believe, not so much. Everybody insures their own property, right? And we do our very best to create the asset to protect it for a period of time. So I think as long as everybody understands that, I think, and we're doing our job properly, I think our insurance is, hopefully the absolute last thing we have to do would be to ever claim on our insurance in that situation.
I do recall something as well. Remind me, what was the conflict? How did that arise?
I think
I remember it was.
My understanding was that there was because there was the same insurance company that did a bit of a U-turn halfway through. But look, I don't know the full details, but it's just something
exactly to be mindful of.
Insurance is getting expensive, right? Our own business, we've seen a 25% rise in the last 18 months, and it's just everyone goes shopping around, all of a sudden they're like, oh, heck, they're all lifted. So it's getting very tough, I suppose, and it seems to be around floods and stuff, the underwriters are getting very tight on what is written in the contract. I know that after the 2020 flood, there was some pretty well covered properties, but experience of the last couple of floods, it has been a lot tougher to work with. So yeah, just in scope, it's tight.
And I'll just say, look, I think the writing's been on the wall for a while that the insurance market's tightening, and there's less and less appetite for insuring these sorts of risks, because actually the underwriters are wearing it actually. And there was 1 year in the not too distant past where the London markets took a real hit actually, and so hence the the tightening up, hence the need to diversify, hence the conversations about what are we insuring versus others. Yeah, all of that. So it's a big rolling conversation.
Chair, if I could add. Oh,
Yep.
Apologies. In 2011, I've had the opportunity to read the minutes from similar meetings where the council were concerned about rising insurance costs, ability to insure, increasing excess, and they went into some effort to consider whether they should self-insure at the time. So we seem to, sort of like back to the past, or this is a topic that's and a risk to council that's been around for a long time. We're still able to insure. I think Wilma has said it. I think she's correct on this. Insurance companies will insure you. It's just going to cost more because that's their business. So, but we're still working our way through trying to get the best value for the ratepayers.
Forrest, did you?
Well, we were talking before about risk and reducing the risk. So if we, for example, have our stop banks and they are fully fit for purpose and they're maintained properly, then we're not liable to, like you said before, John, we're not liable to pay costs for people that get flooded. If we have done our work properly and we've got all the processes in place, then we're only liable if we are negligent, aren't we?
I believe
I
so.
I think all of that
Yeah,
is
yeah, I think that is all
subject to the terms of whatever the incident is.
Mm.
Yeah, and the policies and things.
But you're right. I mean, that logic is makes sense to me. Yes. Yeah. Alison?
Another learning we had from up in the North Island was the fact that people are now building homes where they know the flood's going to be, but it's not condoned by the local councils. So therefore that takes the liability away. In Featherston we stopped and there was a power pole there with a big black mark on it in 1998 flood. On the other side of the road where the houses were about 3 feet down from there, they were building these things. Now, the only way that's going to stop all that silly carry on is that you can't get a consent, so they can't get insurance, so they can't get a mortgage. And we probably have, at the moment, as I see it, there's a lot of homes out there that our department has been okay with, and Southern District Council have been okay with. Well, we're responsible because we allowed them to build them. If we don't allow them to build there, then there is no responsibility.
Yeah, I certainly know. Also, it's a big conversation nationally at the moment in terms of that point. The points around the data and the modelling and making sure that and then having that available and then the insurance.
Well, we have
sorry,
not a chap. We have what's his name? Our Gilder. Is it Peter? Evan. He's working on that, isn't he?
Bruce, would you like to
make a comment? Yes. Having sort of managed building act processes for a decade or so in my previous role, absolutely understand what you're saying around avoiding risk for the future. It's really challenging for territorial authorities at the moment because the Building Act, Section 106, and gives some grounds to decline a building consent. And they're limited basically to be able to decline a building consent. You have to be able to demonstrate that that particular building will accentuate the hazard. That's quite a high bar. And so councils have had limited grounds to withhold building consents. So it's very difficult to say no, even though it might be quite a hazard-prone site. And I can think of a couple of instances in my career where I've tried to discourage people from building in hazard-prone locations, but they are adamant that they're going to build there come hell or high water. There is the ability for councils to mitigate the risk to the ratepayer in the future. You can register a certificate against that title. It used to be a Section 36(2) certificate. I think from memory now it's a Section 75 certificate under the Building Act. What that does is if the property is extensively damaged by inundation in the future, it mitigates the risk to the ratepayer. So that's registered against the title. It's quite clear up front when somebody transfers the property to somebody else.
But that, sorry, through the chair, that in itself would stop getting insurance and a mortgage, wouldn't it?
The stance that different insurance companies take varies from company to company, so I don't want to say it would stop it, but it would have some impact. We'd like to have some impact on the premium you pay, etc. So it varies between companies.
I was actually listening to the output of a select committee, which is talking about this very thing up in Wellington at the moment with all the MPs in terms of it's all wrapped up in that RMA reforms in terms of what the output of that is going to be, and it is very, very aligned with your discussion, Alistair. Yeah, which I think everyone is waiting to see what they're going to say. Thank you, Bruce. Right. Any other questions? Thank you very much. Tanya, it's good to get that update. I imagine we'll be getting another one at the next committee because it is, yes, one where, as you've noted, it is work in progress. It'll be interesting to see what they come back with for us.
Yeah, I think the date, Tracy, is the 1st of October, isn't it not?
1st of October for a
renewals, yeah, 1st of November.
Yeah. Thank you, Tracy. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I have someone move, please. Thank you, Alistair, and seconded by John. In favour?
Aye.
Against? Passed. Right, thank you. Agenda 9.8. Dave and Rachel. Our annual report update, which everyone was discussing this morning without me. So I'll let you provide the update and touch on what we need to.
Thank you, Chair. Kia ora koutou. Through you, Chair, yes, this morning at the Finance and Performance Committee, we were discussing the Q4 long-term plan report. It provides the basis that feeds into the annual report, but we kind of use it as a different mechanism, one internal versus the external facing annual report. Yeah. So in terms of the annual report, it is well on track. We are required to complete the annual report within 4 months of the end of the financial year, which is the 31st of October. At this stage, we have the 23rd of October is an extraordinary meeting of council to be adopting the annual report. Prior to that, both the draft annual report and the draft annual report summary will come through the Risk and Assurance Committee for review. And it's currently under audit with Deloitte. Anthony Smith is the partner. He'll be joining us later today for a different item. Just wanted to highlight a couple of elements to the process following engagement with audit. The first one is in regard to the target achievement status. So what we've heard back from the auditors, as was kind of talked about at Finance and Performance Committee this morning, was that audit have indicated that they have changed their position in regard to the partially achieved target status. For them, they are very much wanting a more black and white, achieved, not achieved, to be put forward. Yeah, they're very much not in favour of using the partially achieved as a category for targets. What that does mean is that there will be some implications to what was some differences between the Q4 report and what you will see coming through in the annual report summary. And what we'll endeavour to do is to highlight where those have changed. In terms of the process, as we are still working through audit and discussing end of year requirements and adjustments, I guess just wanted to highlight that there is still a risk in terms of changes to dates depending on what could come up through that process. We do have built in a bit of scope for change if needed for the risk and assurance prior to adoption, but we will keep you updated should there be any change.
Great. Thank you very much, Dave. Lyndall.
Thanks, Chairman. Can you share any insights into the audit team's change of approach to those target statuses and?
Yeah, so for them, they would like to see, for them, when they look at a measure and a target, their intention of those targets is achieved or not achieved. They likened, or they used the example, if you were doing a test or an exam, if you got 45%, would that be a kind of a partial pass, or would it be a fail or a pass? So
obviously not done in CEA recently, these people. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah. So yeah, when we work through the explanations that the auditors have provided, when we're able to have gone through the process and come at the other end, we'll be able to provide that information in detail.
And we are talking with the auditor later on a slightly different matter, but possibly could be.
Yeah, it's just
raised.
yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, because it's also important to have the comparability between years.
That's right.
Yes.
Would be one of the things.
And factors outside our control that influence the target achievement or
Yeah,
not.
it'd be very specific on that measure. But,
through you, Chair, that's something that we did have. Weren't lengthy, but we did raise with the auditors the need to have consistency, particularly for the community who are reading the annual report, to be able to actually consume it and understand it, and for it not to have changed too much, and they didn't accept that as a.
do you know if it was if it's come from OAG guidance, because that would sort of, if everyone nationally was applying the same method, then I would at least understand it, that it would be around for a lot longer in terms of consistency going forward.
Yeah, through you, Chair, they didn't indicate anything that came from OAG. They did say that they were tightening up internally as to what they were allowing in regard to the audits and those performance measures and targets and the achievement of those. I do understand that there has been a change in the audit partner for us, and that may have some impact.
So just the last point on that. So is that that's the current position, or was it still in discussion in terms of moving away from partially achieved? Is that still a discussion, or was it sort of?
No, they have. They've been really firm on it.
Okay.
Yes.
Any other questions? Amy? Yep.
I'm just really conscious that there's been a bit of commentary from, I can't remember if it was the OAG or the Ombudsman, on the quality of council reporting, generally speaking, and the desire to see, better performance reporting, etc., etc. And I just wondered if those two things might be linked. I know you asked the question about whether it came from the OAG, but I just wonder if there's been a bit of a national steer that might have created this sort of situation. And do you know if any of our colleagues, either territorial or regional, have experienced the same issue?
Each year, I think it would be well worth our while following up with Otago Regional Council, because actually they were using the partially achieved category before we were, and it was their model that we moved to. So yeah, we will follow up with Otago. Actually, in terms of the performance reporting at the Local Government New Zealand conference, actually the Prime Minister raised that matter as well. So yeah, quite a few people looking at performance reporting at the moment.
Okay.
Great. Any other questions? Right. Thank you very much, Dave and Rachel. Appreciate it. I will move. If someone would like to second. Thank you very much, Alistair. In favour? Passed. Okay, and our last before the break is 9.9, our activity plan for this committee. Amy, if you'd like to touch on.
Yep, so this is just our standard report where we talk about what's changed, what's coming up, what have we done differently. Basically, that's highlighted on page 64. Some of the matters there we have talked about already because it relates to pages previously covered in today's meeting.
the main point is that in a month's time, we'll have a committee meeting just for the annual report.
That's
Sort of
correct.
to
Yep.
get that through before it goes to council.
Yep.
So that's probably the
That's the
big
big
point
one.
to
Yep.
note.
I'll move.
Yep, second.
There you go. In favour? Passed.
Yeah.
All right. Now we need to read it out. Reasons for public excluded, and then we will take a tea break.
Yeah, so the reasons that we are going into public excluded are to prevent the disclosure or use of official information for improper gain or advantage. Also to protect the information which is subject to an obligation of confidence, where the making available of the information would likely prejudice the supply of similar information or the information from the same source, where it is in the public interest that such information should continue to be supplied, or would likely otherwise damage the public interest. Also to carry on without prejudice or disadvantage negotiations, including commercial and industrial negotiations. Also to enable any local authority holding information to carry out without prejudice or disadvantage commercial activities. And yes, that is all.
Great. Moved by John, seconded by Morris. In favour?
Aye.
It's passed. Thank you. So we'll take.
The live streaming stopped.
Yep.
Chamber is muted.